What's happening, everybody? Dom here from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals. Welcome back to the channel. So originally, this video was going to be about who I think the Canon EOS R5 C is perfect for, and also about like where it stands between the R5 and the C70, like specs and features wise. That is until I started to use the R5 C and got familiar with it. I decided to ditch that original script, and now I'm going to take this entire video to gripe about something I find supremely annoying about the Canon EOS R5 C. And before you decide that you don't need that type of negativity in your life right now and click away, stick around because I will end up addressing a lot of those topics I originally set out to, but probably in a more roundabout and irritated way. But to get there, we do have to talk about where the R5 C stands between the EOS R5 and the EOS C70 before we get to the troublesome stuff. The R5 C has the same sensor as the R5, but possibly with some fine-tuning that improves its D range and noise levels a bit, so that's sweet. It's got all of the internal 8K recording modes that were offered on the R5, but you get a couple extra things in its Cinema Raw light profile. This would include 8K 60, you're not going to get on the R5. Also under Cinema Raw Lite, you can now record smaller RAW resolutions using the Super 35 and Super 16 crop modes, which I happen to like a lot. But keep that little tater tot of information zipped up in your pants pocket for now, because we'll return to this. And on a physical level, it primarily shares its traits with the R5, with some features of the C70 seen here and there. It's basically an R5 with a pretty bulky fan system built in, which very effectively counters the overheating issue the R5 has. You will not get any overheating issues on the R5C as far as I know. Though that fan does give it a much deeper build and pushes the LCD back quite a bit, kind of like on the C70. And considering it's still a hybrid camera like the R5 and it takes stills, that's not wonderful for photo shooting, but again, that's not what I'm concerned with here. We also have a few more options for a record button, including a big red right here by the grip, and also custom buttons 10 and 13 here can be assigned this task as well. Inputs and outputs are the same as the R5, just with the addition of a dedicated timecode out. That's great. What isn't great is this means we still have this stinking micro HDMI, and I can't stress enough how much I disapprove of that particular video input. But this is a minor disappointment compared to what's coming. The R5C does not have IBIS like its R5 cousin and is going to have to rely on lens stabilization, which thankfully on most RF lenses is pretty great. Where you're definitely going to see its C70 traits is within the menu. It uses the C70's menu, which is firmly a Cinema EOS trait. This is seen on the C200 and I think the later versions of the 3 and 500s. Thankfully, this is going to grant us a lot of helpful video tools not available on the R5. Lots more monitoring and LCD options, better management of audio, anamorphic D-squeeze options, tons of button customization in electronic level, better waveform and vector scope stuff, you know, real professional video tools. The R5C also has the same media situation as the R5, one CF Express Type B and one SD card, unlike the dual SD cards of the C70. You know what the C70 does have though? A bulky, cinema-capable BPA series battery. And if you can't tell by my sudden change of tone, this is my major problem with the EOS R5 C. It has inherently bad power issues and a whole set of recording mode issues that stem off those power issues. And the cherry on top being any of the solutions to this, which we'll talk about, are inevitably going to cost you more money. The root of the problem here is the EOS R5 C takes the LPE6 battery, basically all other Canon bodies take, save for the Cinema line and the Rebels. And also another piece of information, you really should be using the newer LPE6N or LPE6NH batteries that Canon rolled out with their mirrorless line, because those two newer models of this battery allow them to be charged in camera via USB input. And so far this doesn't sound so bad, right? I've used a lot of Canon cameras that use that battery. The battery life is fine. I'm telling you, on the R5C, it is nightmarish. A fully charged LPE6N8 will power this camera for roughly 45 minutes, way less time if you're in a raw recording mode. And we're not even talking about recording yet. This is just like the camera idling, just sitting there on. While you're just like navigating the menus and settings and stuff on this camera, you're just watching the battery life deplete like right before your eyes. It might as well give you a seconds counter rather than a minutes counter. So plain and simple, they put the wrong battery in this camera, and I know it probably would have been a big ask to include the BPA series connection on this camera, just given the form factor they were trying to keep similar to the EOS R5. I get it, but this camera simply needs a better power solution than the LPE6, and this would have made so much more sense. And I think Canon hugely missed the mark on that. At least give this thing a dedicated DC power input like what's on the C70 or any other Cinema EOS line camera if you're going to give this supposedly cine hybrid camera body a photo camera's battery. I would have even less of a problem with this if they dropped the C moniker on the EOS R5 C, because this is not something that any Cinema EOS line Canon camera would have a problem with. And remember how I said that this wasn't even the real problem? Introducing the real problem. Remember those internal Cinema RAW light modes I was loving so much? When you are powering the camera from a single Canon battery recording in any of these modes I'm showing here, it gives you this warning. Basically what that error page is telling you is that in these recording modes, the camera will not be able to dedicate the same amount of power through the contacts in the lens mount like it does in any other recording mode. It just shuts those right off. And you're probably saying like, that's not such a bad thing. What are you missing, like some lens metadata? Well, on these RF lenses, aka the lenses that should work the best on this RF camera, that means no power to the lens stabilization, no changing iris via the camera's dial or on the customizable control rings that they have. This, of course, also means no power going to the autofocus motors, which you probably saw coming. What I bet you didn't see coming is that you can't even manually focus these RF lenses in these modes. All RF lenses are focused by wire and require power to even do that. Oh, I also forgot to mention that when they don't have power to the lens, they default to the most closed aperture there is. So you have a lens on there that can't focus, autofocus, or manual focus. It's not stabilized. You literally can't change that focus plane no matter what you do, and it's defaulted to the highest aperture. So it's kind of an optical brick. So basically, once you get past that menu, you'll notice you have your image up and it will let you record, but you get this equally funny message down here at the bottom left that says lens does not work. It literally might as well say lens no worky, big power, don't know what do. I feel like Canon's rationale for this was like, oh, if they're shooting these internal Cinema RAW light modes, they probably have cine glass on the camera, right? Well, the answer for me is no, and probably for a lot of other people it's also no. I figured that my new expensive RF mirrorless Canon glass would be the perfect pairing for this RF cinema camera. The camera doesn't have IBIS, it relies on lens stabilization, which is great. This is going to be the best option to pair up with the camera's sophisticated autofocus system, probably one of the best pairings there is. I would probably have less problems adapting EF glass onto this camera. Maybe then I would at least be able to, like, I don't know, change the iris or manually focus. Okay, cool it down, Dommy B. At least it's not every recording mode that it's doing this. It's just those specific Cinema RAW light modes in the higher frame rate version of those modes. But for me, at least, those are the most desired shooting modes this camera has to offer, so it's a bit of a bummer. Okay, on a positive note, like I said, there are some solutions to this power issue. Unfortunately, they're pretty much all going to involve coughing up some extra money, whether it's to Canon or a third-party device. So back to this warning again. It tells you that you can go to the power source navigation page for more info, which is the very first menu option in the wrench menus. It's like they knew users were going to be looking for this in an angered frenzy. Once you're in here, it basically gives you two options to figure out what you can shoot with what gear. First option, you can start by checking what power source is required based on the lens you are using. So I'm selecting RF. Once you're there, you select which recording modes you would like to know if you can shoot in like a checkbox style. So I'll just select a few various ones, enter those, and then if the prompt shows up on the next page and it doesn't include battery pack, you need one of those two accessories it mentions, which I'll cover in just a second. The other way you can find this out, which I think is the better way, is to check by recording setting, which just kind of switches up the order of things here. Now you select your lens type and then the type of power source you're going to use. Now it gives you that same list of recording modes, but now the ones with the circle next to them will be the ones that are available given the selections you made. And I do see why they do this, but it's kind of funny that it groups them up like this. It kind of makes it look like it can record in any frame rate in between these values, which is not the case. So that's like their way of letting you navigate which shooting mode you'll be able to do given which power source and lens you have on there. It gets really granular and weird, and as you're going through that menu, you just can't help but think like, why am I doing this? But anyways, now we're going to talk about those two power solutions that it listed in camera, and then I'm also going to talk about one third-party solution that I think is low-key the best one. One of those options it said is the DC power coupler attached to the DRE6C Canon dummy battery, specifically the DRE6C. Other LPE6 dummies will not work unless it has the output that the DRE6C does. This way, all of the camera's recording modes are unlocked, but you have the obvious limitation of being tethered to wall power to some degree. The other option it lists in camera is the PDE1 USB power adapter. This is another Canon product that does something similar. It's a DC power adapter, but for a USB-C input, and this would go into the R5C while the battery is in there to supplement the battery's power. And this is just the USB power supply option that Canon recommends in camera because it's a Canon product, of course. But here you have a couple of other options if you wanted to go the third-party direction, which I honestly think is the best way to go. There are a lot of great USB power banks available online, and this will be like a self-contained way to get that supplemental power via the USB. The benefit there being that you can just like rig that to your camera. They're pretty similar in size to like an SSD, so it would be like similar if you've ever recorded out to an SSD right on camera like that. But this way, you're off of wall power. One that I know will work for sure is this Anker PowerCore Plus 26K. This or something similar is going to be a cheaper option than the two Canon provided options, and also is just going to be a device that's useful for a lot of other things. It could essentially just be a portable phone charger or a portable charger for anything that charges off of USB. The downside to that being, since you're off DC power now, you have to have a constant gauge on how much power that power bank has. So those are pretty much going to be all of your main solutions when it comes to tackling that recording modes problem in the R5C. If you had the perfectly reasonable thought to just use a grip extension that works for the R5 on the R5C, that will surely work, right? Well, you're almost there. These surprisingly do actually natively fit on the R5C. I was really surprised at that, just given Canon's proprietariness. But this actually still won't overcome that recording mode issue. And I think this is because the way these battery grips use the batteries, it's continuous, not simultaneous. So it uses one battery and then the other. It's not combining the wattage from both of those batteries. However, that's not to say that that's not a good solution for just the regular horrible power issues that the R5C has. I think that's an excellent solution to that. It just won't unlock you those extra recording modes. And finally, I should mention that currently, as far as I know, I don't think there's any cinema battery that outputs the power that you need to supplement the power to the R5C via their USB outputs, which I thought would be a no-brainer solution at the beginning of this. Why would I think that? Okay, so if you thought that that got really granular and annoying, you're right. Canon absolutely threw users of the R5C for a loop here with these wonky power solutions. And maybe you're like, Dom, it's not that big of a deal. It's just in those Cinema Raw light modes. It's not just that. This camera is borderline unusable if you're just relying on LPE6 battery power, which, like, just as a fundamental, if you're rolling out a camera, it should be able to stay on for like 30 minutes or so on a fully charged battery without you worrying about it shutting off. And again, as I said earlier, I think a way better solution than any of this stuff would have been to just give the R5C a dedicated DC power input like the C70 has. It's clear that the camera needs more power, and instead of hoping that we'll all just jump through hoops to get it that power, it really should have just been included with a DC in. To be fair though, I don't totally dislike the R5C. I think the heat management solution was absolutely necessary coming from the R5. The image can be really phenomenal if you get it right, obviously, and internally, it's much more prepared for professional video applications with all of these things built in. There's just this part of me though that thinks that there's hardly any point in making all these improvements to this camera if you're not going to give it a straightforward power solution that can keep up with all of those changes. So that is pretty much going to do it for this video. I'm sorry if that just seemed like an airing out of all my grievances, but I really did think that would be helpful for you if you're thinking about buying or even using the R5C. It could be a perfectly great camera. I just think that DC coupler or that USB power input is an absolute must if you're using this camera, not just something to rent along with it to get those extra recording modes. So, as always, if you have any questions about any of the gear we talked about in this video, or you want to really take a deep dive into what you can and can't do with the R5C that I may have not mentioned in this video, you know what to do. Drop a comment in the comment section below and we'll start a discussion. Also, if you happen to like this video, hit it with the thumbs up button down there to let me know you liked it. And if you're not already, subscribe to the channel. We are barreling towards that 100,000 subscriber milestone, so every single sub helps. If you're already subbed, thank you very much. You can also hit that little bell button that's next to the subscribe button, and that way you'll be in the loop whenever we post new content. So remember, with great power comes great responsibility. And we'll see you in the next one.